I had always dreamed of owning a quiet piece of land far from the noise of the city, and after years of saving, I finally purchased a secluded ranch just outside the HOA boundary of Ridgewood Hills. Or so I thought. My plan was simple: build a small off-grid cabin where I could relax, host my godson during college breaks, and maybe do a little writing and woodwork. The land was raw but beautiful, surrounded by thick pine and cottonwood trees, with a winding creek that sang to the wind every evening. I poured everything into that cabin with my own hands: reclaimed timber, stone I'd carried up the ridge, even solar panels I salvaged and rewired myself. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And more importantly, it was legal. I had my permits in order, county-level approval, and even environmental clearance to build near the creek. It should have been simple. But the day Karen showed up, everything changed. She marched down my gravel road in pastel heels, waving a clipboard like a sword. I was on the ladder finishing the roofing when I heard the unmistakable clack of entitlement on gravel. "You're in violation of Ridgewood Hills HOA Code 17B, she shouted, as if that meant anything. I climbed down and politely told her. This land wasn't even in Ridgewood Hills. It was adjacent, not included. She scoffed, told me she was the HOA president and she knew better. That phrase would become her trademark. The next day, I got a letter, handwritten no less, with Ridgewood Hills HOA's letterhead taped at the top and a laundry list of violations she claimed I was guilty of: unauthorized construction, unsightly property development, even environmental interference. I ignored it. A week later, she brought company. 2 men with clipboards who clearly weren't with any official office. I watched from the porch as they peered through binoculars and muttered among themselves like they'd uncovered a terrorist camp. Then came the sheriff's deputy, who, after reading through my permits and deed map, simply tipped his hat and said, "You're good, sir." Karen looked like she might burst. She called a special HOA emergency meeting and posted on the neighborhood app that a rogue builder was threatening community standards. Her posse rallied, mostly bored retirees and nosy homeowners, and before long, I had drones buzzing over my cabin and random residents driving by to snap photos like I was Bigfoot. Still, I kept quiet. That is, until I came home one afternoon to find a bright red stop work order stapled to my front door, issued not by the county but by Karen's self-made HOA task force. That crossed a line. I drove to the county office with my permits and they confirmed once again I was not under HOA jurisdiction. I asked if they could send someone to formally tell her to back off. They did, and for about a week things settled. Until she called the cops, and not just the local sheriff. No, she went higher. Karen, it turns out, had a friend in a state agency and convinced them I was illegally constructing a structure in a protected area. One morning, I woke up to the sound of 4 black SUVs pulling up to my property. Officers in tactical gear stepped out, and at first I thought some kind of emergency was unfolding. "Sir, we've received a report of unauthorized construction on environmentally sensitive land," one of them said. I showed my permits again. They called it in, then huddled near their vehicles. Karen had followed them in her Lexus, smirking like she'd just won a war. But then, one of the officers looked closer at the permit. "This was signed by Matthew S. Gordon?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "He's the Director of Environmental Compliance." The man looked at Karen and frowned. "This permit was co-signed by the governor's office." She froze. I went on, explaining that my godson, whom I raised after his parents passed, was now studying political science and had interned with the governor the past summer. As a gift, the governor himself had visited my cabin site and expedited approval. Karen's smirk vanished like mist in sunlight. She tried to argue, claimed it must be forged. The officer firmly told her she was interfering with a legally authorized project and warned her of consequences if she trespassed again. The irony? All her attention had brought state eyes onto Ridgewood Hills instead. Within a month, the state began investigating them for multiple HOA code violations and misuse of funds. Karen's name was suddenly in meetings she didn't want to attend. Residents began whispering. Petitions circulated to remove her. And meanwhile, my cabin stood proud, untouched, nestled under the trees with new siding going up each week. Karen stopped showing up, but the damage to her reputation lingered. In the weeks that followed, life returned to a semblance of normalcy, though I stayed wary. I installed trail cameras and motion lights not out of paranoia, but because I knew Karen's type didn't give up easily. Sure enough, about 2 months later, I noticed tire tracks near the edge of my property, the muddy kind that suggested someone had tried to hide their visit. My cameras picked up an image of a dark sedan parking briefly, its occupant stepping out to snap photos before driving away. I sent the footage to the county. They assured me it wasn't part of any official investigation. I had a hunch, though. That same week, I received a suspiciously formal letter from a private legal office retained on behalf of Ridgewood Hills HOA, demanding I cease environmental disruption and threatening civil litigation. I laughed out loud, then forwarded the letter to the governor's legal team, who had instructed me to do exactly that if any further harassment occurred. Within 3 days, that law firm withdrew their complaint, claiming incorrect client. Information. Karen was burning bridges faster than she could build them. Then came the local news. A journalist from the Ridgewood Weekly had caught wind of the escalating tensions and wanted to do a story on unlawful overreach by HOAs. He showed up at my cabin with a drone, a camera crew, and a calm curiosity that made me agree to an interview. I told my story plainly, how a single resident had weaponized bureaucracy and social pressure, and how my entirely legal project was being attacked under the false guise of neighborhood preservation. The article ran under the headline, "When HOA Power Goes Too Far." It spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the tide turned. Other residents began coming forward. Stories of Karen harassing them over mailbox colors, garden gnomes, even the wrong kind of wind chimes. It turned out I wasn't the first target, just the loudest. A petition started circulating for a recall election. Anonymous flyers were taped to neighborhood lampposts calling Karen a dictator. Then someone put a billboard up, HOA or no. Way, it read. Karen was crumbling. I got a surprise visit not long after. The governor himself, on his way back from a speaking event, stopped by with his security detail to check on the cabin's progress. He complimented the stonework and even took a photo with me on the porch. "Let me know if they give you any more trouble," he said, half joking but fully serious. That picture went viral in Ridgewood Hills. Karen had made me public enemy. #1, and now I was shaking hands with the state's highest office. She resigned within the month. The HOA board tried to save face, claiming she had fulfilled her tenure, but everyone knew the truth. The cabin was finished by fall, insulated, solar-powered, creek-fed, and gorgeous. My godson visited over Thanksgiving and stared at it like it was a castle. "You built all this with your hands," he said. "And a whole lot of permits," I laughed. To this day, I keep a copy of that original HOA violation letter in a frame, by the fireplace. It reminds me of the fight, of how easily one person's obsession with power can disrupt someone else's peace, and how standing your ground, with truth and law on your side, always wins in the end. Karen may have tried to tear down my cabin, but she only succeeded in tearing down her own empire. And now, whenever I sit on my porch and sip coffee as the sun rises over the creek, I smile. Because I earned this. Every nail, every board, every breath of pine-scented air. It's mine. And no HOA will ever change that. After Karen resigned and the dust settled in Ridgewood Hills, a curious silence took over. The very air around my cabin felt lighter, as if the weight of HOA paranoia had lifted. I threw myself into refining the interior of the cabin, installing cedar shelves, crafting a hand-carved mantel, and fitting the space with every self-sufficient feature I'd dreamed of. Rainwater collection barrels, composting toilets, and a high-efficiency wood stove made the space more than livable. It became a sanctuary. But peace doesn't last forever, not when people like Karen leave behind legacies of control. One early spring morning, just as the creek thawed and the trout returned, I found a new SUV parked near my boundary fence. It wasn't Karen's familiar Lexus, but a black Suburban with Ridgewood Hills security printed on the side. The HOA had installed a private security force. 2 uniformed guards were sitting inside, binoculars pointed at my property line. I approached calmly, coffee mug in hand, and tapped on their window. One of them rolled it down with a sheepish smile. "Routine patrol, sir." I asked who sent them. They fumbled. Apparently, the new HOA board had authorized broader patrol, routes to ensure community safety. Never mind that my property was still outside their legal jurisdiction. I informed them politely that they were trespassing. They backed off but returned several times that month, always idling near my land, taking notes. This wasn't over. The new HOA president, a man named Don Temple, reached out next. Unlike Karen, he came with a grin and a gift basket. "We just want to mend fences," he said. The irony wasn't lost on me. He offered to formally recognize my cabin as a community asset, with access to Ridgewood's amenities in exchange for voluntary compliance with some HOA standards. I declined. That's when the tone shifted. Don's emails became curt. He demanded access to inspect my property for environmental safety, citing a mysterious wetland reevaluation. I forwarded the message straight to the governor's liaison. 2 days later, a county officer called me, someone I'd worked with before. He apologized for the repeated harassment and advised me to document everything. Turns out, the HOA had filed a new petition to redraw the neighborhood's boundary lines, an aggressive move that would bring my cabin into their control. It was a long shot, but technically possible if they lobbied hard enough. I couldn't allow that. With help from the governor's team and a local land rights attorney, I launched a counter-petition backed by nearby ranchers and landowners who feared the HOA's reach. The movement spread. We held meetings at local diners and town halls. People came out of the woodwork, retirees, farmers, even former HOA members who regretted their past roles. The message was simple. Our land, our rules. Don wasn't ready to back down. He began a smear campaign, accusing me of illegal water diversion and improper septic disposal. Reporters showed up again, cameras flashing, asking if I was polluting the creek. I calmly walked them through my systems, demonstrated everything, showed logs, even brought out the water testing kits. The journalist nodded, impressed. That story backfired on Don. The turning point came when a well-respected environmental scientist from the state reviewed my setup and called it a model for sustainable off-grid living. Her endorsement shut down any remaining argument. The HOA's boundary expansion petition failed in a county vote by a landslide. Over 90% opposed it. Afterward, Don disappeared from public view. Word spread that he was pressured to resign, much like Karen before him. Ridgewood Hills installed a new reformist board, one that pledged to focus inward rather than meddling in outsiders' lives. Today, my cabin sits unbothered. The creek still sings. My godson is finishing law school and says he wants to build his own place someday. Just like yours, he says. And maybe someday, someone else will fight to keep the peace they've carved out for themselves. I'll be here to help them, because peace is worth protecting, and no HOA will ever steal it from me again. The spring after the HOA's final failed attempt to redraw boundaries brought more than just wildflowers and sun-warmed winds. It brought the kind of closure that only time and a little poetic justice can deliver. My cabin stood untouched, stronger than ever, its cedar beams glowing amber in the evening light. No more SUVs parked near the creek. No more clipboard crusaders. The only visitors these days were the deer and the occasional friend bringing over smoked brisket or homebrewed cider. I had won, but more importantly, I had endured. It wasn't long before my godson came to stay again, this time not just for a visit. He'd passed the bar and needed a place to clear his head before jumping into the legal fray. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. A young lawyer raised in part on land that almost got swallowed up by legal bullying. "You really built a fortress here," he told me one morning, coffee in hand, watching a hawk ride the thermals. Not just with logs, but with patience. I smiled because he wasn't wrong. Word of the HOA saga had traveled far beyond Ridgewood Hills. A podcast episode covering the battle had gone viral. Emails poured in from across the country, folks dealing with their own HOAs, asking for advice, or simply wanting to thank someone for standing up. I tried to respond to each one. That attention helped me finally publish the memoir I'd been working on. It was picked up by a small press under the perfect title, Cabin Rights, Holding the Line. Not a bestseller, but enough to spark conversation and give people hope. But the real full-circle moment came in late summer, when the county invited me to speak at a rural land use summit. I wasn't a politician, just a guy with a hammer and some grit, but they said that's what made my voice matter. I stood in front of that crowd, ranchers, builders, students, and told them about Karen, about Don, about boundary lines, and paper threats. I talked about the importance of being informed, of protecting your rights before someone tells you what they think your rights should be. And I told them about the cabin, the one that survived because I did. Afterward, a couple approached me. The woman wore a Ridgewood Hills pin. She introduced herself as the new HOA president, elected after the reformers took over. "We want to start fresh," she said, extending a hand. "What happened shouldn't have happened." I shook her hand, not because I forgot what they did, but because I'd finally seen them learn. It wasn't forgiveness, it was closure. Now, as the days grow shorter and the air turns crisp, I sit on the porch and watch the fireflies blink over the grass like tiny lanterns of peace. I think about how a simple dream, just a quiet place in the woods, became a battleground. And then, a beacon. My cabin didn't just stand, it became a story, a symbol, a home. And in the end, that's all I ever wanted. So let the wind carry the last of the noise away. Let the creek keep singing. The fight is over, and I'm still here.